Okay, so my name's Austin, and this is my next video in the series on why I love the novel Infinite Jest. And in a sense, this video will be a continuation of the last three because I'll once again be talking about the Boston AA meeting that happens between pages 343 and 379. But this will also be different from those videos because instead of talking about the contents of this section, I'm going to talk about a number of the stylistic elements that are included in it to sort of show how the way this book is written helps emphasize some of the points that it's trying to make explicitly through its contents. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about how some of these stylistic features help make the point that it's incredibly hard to truly hear what a person is trying to say as you're listening to them, right? That this is something that requires an incredible amount of active effort because there's a world of distractions around you, whether it's your own internal experience, your emotions, and your reactions to what they're saying, or if it's the situation around you that is drawing your attention away, right? There is so much going on around you that to truly sit there and hear what a person's saying, to try and distill any kind of real meaning out of it, this is something that requires a lot of effort. And I think this book and the way that it's written helps to make this point by having a very disruptive style. Right, this is something that happens all throughout this book, and it's something I'll definitely talk about more when I get to the character of James and Cadenza towards the end. But this book is very disruptive of itself. And this is something that's certainly on display in this section about the Boston AA meeting. Right? Sometimes this is done in a very macro way that's very obvious, right? Like if you look at page 367, which is in the middle of this section on the Boston AA meeting, right in the middle of the page, there is a just randomly interjected paragraph about the Statue of Liberty during subsidized time, right? That has nothing to do with anything around it and only has minor relevance to the rest of the book, right? But it's just thrown in there to disrupt the reader. And what I mean is, I think this is included to show, trying to understand what someone's trying to say requires a lot of effort. Because if you're going through and reading this book and then you get to this section and you read that paragraph, then all of a sudden you now have to start putting effort in to remember what was going on before and then trying to regroup them back together, right? This is something that I, as the reader, have to work through. Similar to these very macro insertions, there are smaller scale ones too. These little 6 to 8 word phrases that are just thrown in between hyphens in the middle of a section, in the middle of a sentence, right? On page 370, there's a little one towards the bottom that just says, as Joel V. put it later to Gately, right? It's just this little 8 word insertion, but it really disrupts the flow of the sentence. So I, as the reader, have to try and remember what's going on and trying to make sense of everything that's going around outside of this little distraction. And this is something that takes a lot of effort on my part. My personal favorite example of this, or type of example of this that occurs throughout the book, but definitely in this section, is one that you can see an example of on the bottom of page 377 going through the top of page 378, where it's sort of this mid-level interjection, right? It's not like a whole new section, and it's not just like a little thing in the middle of a sentence. It's more of this breakup in the middle of a paragraph that kind of within itself has its own flow and its own thing going, that it really sucks you into just that, right? Like the example that I'm talking about here at the end of 377 to the beginning of 388, this whole hyphenated section. It's about 100 words in itself. And it just completely distracts you from what you were reading about before. And, this interjection, it's in the section of the story being told by the final speaker at this meeting. The woman that gave birth to a stillborn infant because she abused substances all through her pregnancy. In the middle of this story, there's a part where she gets to a section on the Department of Social Services. And immediately, as soon as that phrase is mentioned, it says, Gately sees alcoholic moms all over the hall cross themselves and shudder at the mere mention of DSS, every addicted parent's worst nightmare. And then it goes on for a while to the point where it's just this little big, just like block out in the middle of this woman's story. And there have actually been times where, in order to read even just this woman's story coherently, I've had to mentally block out certain sections. There's another one on page 376. There's a long section that's covered in parentheses where, in order to read this woman's story in a coherent way, you almost have to intentionally skip over those sections because there's just so much there to distract you. But the reason why I love the example that I just mentioned so much is because, once again, it's proving its own point on multiple levels, because this little insertion meant to distract me as a reader. The very specific example that's being used is of a character being distracted by what's going on around them. So in multiple ways, it's proving, one, to me, that distractions happen and they trip you up from what's majorly going on, but it's also giving a very realistic example of how this kind of distraction can occur in real life. And overall, like I said, I think, this is just a very interesting thing that this book does with the way that it's written, where it tries to intentionally trip you up to prove a point to you that many of the characters have to learn on their own, that trying to distill meaning out of something you're being told is very, very hard, and it requires a lot of work. And this book proves it to you by making you put in work in very obvious ways. And I think that's really good. And that's all I have to say for this video.